So I saw this tweet the other day about how Taylor Swift and Beyonce, who have like all the social power in the world, have not said anything about Palestine yet. Meanwhile, Reneé Rapp, who has like 3 credits to her name, has like at the GLAAD Awards spoke out about having a ceasefire. Like, do you think Beyonce and like Taylor Swift are people like with similar social power, like have an obligation to say something about Palestine?
I don't know. I think it's tough because the conversation is so polarizing. I think at least in what I've seen, it's been a very people are very sensitive to the topic.
Yeah.
And I think in a world, where people feel fear of being vulnerable, expressing their opinion, cancer culture, and feeling like they're going to say the wrong thing, I think it becomes a very polarizing and difficult thing where almost that fear of being wrong or being rejected or offering maybe a unpopular opinion becomes an issue and almost like creates that silent compliance. I wouldn't for a second pretend to think that the kind of the conflict between Palestine and Israel that we see today is anything short than a very complicated one with a lot of nuance and history. But I think it's an interesting point of like, if people have platforms and the ability to say something, are you obligated because you're in the public eye to say it?
Yeah.
I don't know. I feel like if you're not educated on the topic or you're not comfortable with speaking on it, just because you're in the public eye doesn't necessarily mean that you owe us a point of view per se. I don't know.
I don't mean to get us off track this quickly, but I thought you said cancer culture, and I imagined a world where
I thought he said that too.
And I imagined a world.
Cancer? Oh,
and
I might have said cancer culture.
And I imagined a world where we like
me, but
very cancer forward.
Like cancer, like me cancer,
and me.
Oh, that too.
Oh, look at what I signed up for here. This Pisces over here just all.
Are
you
a Pisces?
I am.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, look at all the water.
Yeah.
Is there water, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Fuck you guys.
Well. I will say though, back to what we were talking about. I think it's interesting too because obviously people at the caliber of Taylor Swift and Beyonce are obviously getting that feedback, but then we're also seeing people at all levels getting that like feedback, like no matter how big or small their platform is. Sure. I feel like anyone who has a platform is getting that same energy, which is interesting because I don't really know if it applies differently like based on your platform size, but it is interesting to see how everyone kind of across the board is getting that pressure.
Like, I don't need to like my Mexican chef that I follow on TikTok to be like free Palestine. Maybe I do. I don't know. Maybe I do.
Yeah,
maybe I want her to.
Yeah, that's why I'm saying I don't know.
Yeah, now that I'm saying it out loud, yeah, maybe I kind of do want her to. Personally.
I know who you're talking about.
And we will tag her. And we will call her out. Just kidding.
I mean, but it is people of color who I do see, like from large platforms or small platforms, who are calling it out and talking about how they're pro-Palestine. So I just feel like that's an interesting trend that I'm seeing. I don't necessarily see white celebrities or white influencers following that same trend, at least not to the degree that I see others, with the exception of Reneé Rapp. I don't know what the answer is in terms of like what level of impact that you have to have as a public figure in order to say something. Because we do live in a world where influencers have like such a huge impact on millions of people, millions of especially young people. And I don't know if, somebody who's famous for, say, making up songs about like making up rap songs about dinner, or like that's the guy that I follow currently. But I don't know if they have the obligation to speak on it. Or not, you know, and what Stephen was saying, you know, like there's different levels of being informed, and whether or not people are or not, and kind of like, I don't know, some people in the public eye could just be mimicking what they hear from other people, and it's, I don't know.
You know what I think I miss? I used to be on this like this DEI working group, like diversity, equity, and inclusion group. When I was working at a couple schools ago, and when we first started the working group, the head of the working group asked us like, what got us into like social justice? What was the first like, who's the first influential figure? What was the first book? Whatever, like that really got us like down for the cause or whatever. And I thought about it and I was like, mine was Tupac. And like, you know, first time I listened to Tupac, I was like 11 or 12 years old. And obviously he was singing like crazy songs about wanting to like kill Biggie. And like, there's obviously some problematic songs wrapped up in there, but he also had songs like Changes that like, that was the first time where I was like, oh shit, this guy is talking about real shit that I've never seen before, or like not since I was younger. And it was my first window into a world of like injustice. And it was my first window into a world of like, what fighting back could look like. And, you know, he was in a bunch of interviews too, where he would say, because he had, you know, his mom was a Black Panther. And so he came from that, you know, that ilk. And so I feel like, at least me personally, I miss artists having like that sense of conviction and not being overly wrapped up in this idea of like, I need to play this kind of like centrist role so that I don't lose this demographic or this demographic. And like, sure, like there's definitely some people who take stands on certain issues, but I just think about missing that really overt, like I am going to say some like shit that's going to make people uncomfortable.
Yeah. I mean, and especially in hip hop too. Like I feel like we're seeing that so much less nowadays. There's who's the equivalent of Tupac now?
That's what I was trying to think of.
Not us old heads over here talking about how the game done changed. But no, I think it's interesting. If I had to think back of when, you know, back in 2020, when everybody was figuring out that, you know, there was social injustice in the world, and I was leading a DEI group at my job, and it was interesting to go through that and, you know, advocate for paying attention. And, you know, that was the first time where like other things had happened before, but it was like, no, like this, we're going to spend some time on this, and having to advocate and have the conversation. But even beyond just the work and what I was doing at the time, it's even just looking at friend groups or people outside. There was that longing of just acknowledge that this is it, reach out, not shy away from the conversation. So to your point, kind of the start of this conversation, Tim, it's a little bit of, well, yeah, it'd be nice to hear and know and have the opinion and not be afraid that it's gonna, you know, not ignore it, or to be like, because I mean, I think part of the ignoring the conversation or standing away from it is part of the privilege of, well, if it doesn't directly impact me, well, I like, oh, that kind of sucks. Like, I'm just going to stay away from it. Now, sure. Now, what platforms do you have the conversation? Maybe if you're a Taylor Swift or a Beyonce, having an opinion and shouting that out from the rooftop, maybe that's not the right forum, given if you're not an expert on the topic. I'm not saying they have to do that, but we also don't know if they're having those conversations in other rooms that we're not part of. So there's a little bit of, you know, while I don't see it as one of the billions of followers of whatever pop sensation, that doesn't necessarily mean they're not having those conversations. So there's being devil's advocate at that point. But I think, you know, it reminds me of a quote that James Baldwin said. I'm going to read it here to make sure I get it right. it was in an essay in the New York Times, and it says, not everything that is faced can be changed, but nothing can be changed until it's faced. So there is that burden of, well, we can't just sit idly by. We can't not have those conversations, not voice those opinions. And I even think, you know, someone like Jonathan Glazer at the Oscars, who won, I think it was international film feature for, I think what was it called? Zone of Interest.
Yeah.
And literally like about the Holocaust, harrowing story. And his speech, he was talking about how he's Jewish and, like, you know, talking about essentially the bombings that are happening in Gaza. It's like in my name and the religion that I hold, being a Jew. And it's like, here he is talking about how, like, I just don't want to see so much indiscriminate killing, not denouncing like the right to protect itself. Like it was very like clearly specific what he was talking about. And then for me, I'm like, wow, that was very moving. Someone that is Jewish really saying, like, despite what terribly happened on October 7th, like, and the right to defend this, but also at the same time, like, I don't want to just see just mass death on the other side. Like, that's not good. Like, what someone would just happen to be born and now they're all of a sudden, like, a child was born, they didn't choose to be born Palestinian, and now that's happening. Like that they're not Hamas, like they're just a child. But then to see the community in backlash against him of, like, now you're an anti-Semite, now you're saying, like, anti-Israel. I'm like, well, hold on a second. Like, that's not what he said, but it was such a black or white opinion. If you have any bit of grace for the other side, it's a crime. And it makes it complicated for me because I will admit firsthand, I don't know the full story. I know bits and pieces, but I'm not a scholar on the subject. But I think, again, what happened on October 7th, absolutely terrible. And I know that there's been plenty of conflict between this disputed land over years of history there. And it's been bad. It's been terror for both communities. But then, yes, to see now in response, 23,000 plus people have died, and the majority of those have been Palestinian. Like, something, the math isn't mathing for me of, like, how do we, like, there shouldn't be that kind of hatred, like what Hamas stands for, like terrible, like as a Jew. Like, I can't imagine what that would be like, having people literally denouncing and saying, I want an entire race, an entire population to die. Like, that's terrible what Hamas is saying and what they believe in and what they're doing. But then to hold everybody in Palestine accountable for that opinion and then indiscriminately kill on that, like, that's hard. And I have to imagine there is that gray area of, like, can you hold both in your mind space of, I don't want to see, like, I have Jewish, like, I don't want them to be persecuted for being who they are, being born there or having that religion, but I also don't want to see innocent people whose only crime was they happened to be born in the wrong place in the world. Like, how do we speak on that and have that conversation without then all of a sudden just being just totally ridiculed for potentially having the wrong opinion, whatever gray area, whatever black and white side you're on. It's something I've very much struggled with. It's hard for me.
It's interesting too, because I feel like where we started with this conversation, do these big celebrities with these big platforms, should they be speaking up and that in itself feels like such a simple, it's not, but it sounds like such a simple yes, no, black, white question. I don't know. Sometimes I'm like, yes, they really should be speaking about it. And then sometimes I'm like, how am I expecting a celebrity to have a well-formed thought or opinion that they feel confident enough in to then share with literally the world? It's interesting to ladder it back up to the original question too.
Or look back in 2020 when a lot of the NBA players are talking about Black Lives Matter and that, and like the whole response was shut up and dribble. Or, I mean, Colin Kaepernick still doesn't have a job, and that was because he said, hey, like, the country that I live in, I'm happy to be here. I'm happy to be American, but like things aren't right. And did a modest form of protest, certainly wasn't doing anything crazy, and literally is now have been blackballed in the NFL, all the hatred that he was getting. So it's like we want people to talk, but when they do talk, it's no, stay in your lane. So where, I'm not saying that's what you're saying, Tim, but like in the broader spectrum of like when people have spoke out on topics that are very of the social outside of their main job, then all of a sudden they're told like, nope, go back. You're not allowed to say that. Or everybody's fearing Taylor Swift for potentially swaying the vote this, coming up. And I've seen polls now saying like, oh, like 40% of people think that Taylor Swift is going to endorse the future president. Come on now. Like what, like this is like, she's just touring the world. And so she's one of the like most famous, if not the best artists of all time. Like that. How is that all of a sudden
separate
now? Like,
entities.
it's separate entities, but like it's crazy that there's the influence that exists, but then at the same time, we don't want to hear it. We want, if it differs from our opinion.
Yeah.
And I think it's like a function of our, not to get like overly macro with it, but like it's a function of our culture in the sense that, like, to give an example, I'm part of this supporter group for this soccer team. And we
Which
are
soccer team?
Huh?
Which soccer team?
ACFC. Dale. So part of this really awesome supporter group. We're very like justice minded, community driven, like predominantly Latina and queer. And we are also very much like seen as like the rebel group because of certain like things that we've spoken out on as a group. For instance, during the last ACFC game, we pretty overtly protested for Palestine. And our flags were taken away, posters were taken away, because the ownership group didn't want any kind of Palestinian support being shown at all. And I say all that to say that, like, we had we had a conversation a few weeks ago in planning for this new season and how we were going to show up as a group in support of Palestine. And I think the most interesting thing about those conversations was this communal support and like this communal understanding of people going like, hey, this is how I'm going to show up. I'm going to be outspoken. I'm going to wear my shirts. I'm going to wear my keffiyehs. I'm going to have my fist up. But I also know that not everybody is able to show up in that same way. And what we want to do is like give you the support to show up in the way that feels right to you, even if that's more silently. And I think that happens in communal spaces where people have relational trust, where people are closer, where people understand each other better, people trust each other more. But I think we live in a culture where everybody knows everything that everybody's doing. And there is no real like close communal space in the way that I think we were meant to be. Like in a very, I don't know, me personally, in a very like indigenous minded way. And we've moved so far away from that where we're living in this like overly interconnected way where everybody has to know everything. Everybody knows what's going on all the time. And we've moved away from these real small communal spaces to like over individuality. That makes it really hard to have like these kinds of conversations.
Yeah, I feel like this is very divisive. I think, having perspective of being a maybe impacted minority group in the last big movement. It's weird that it's movements and some live and die, and I'll have a whole conversation about that. But like you saw a lot of response from corporations, other people were weighing in, and it feels like this one there is a lot more tension, or maybe just lessons learned over the past 4 years of saying nothing is better, but it's interesting that how polarizing the response has been in the terms of either you're one or the other. There's no room for both. And then the other side of that is just from a company perspective, or like there's not like a big push on socials. It's almost like a, hey, we want to take people that don't take a stance on things. It's almost like, can we stay as far away from saying anything in any direction versus saying something or having a point of view. So it's like, I'd rather not offer a point of view at all just to stay safe, so that I know I can't appease the masses because there's masses on both sides of it. So I'm just not going to say anything. And maybe that my neutrality means I don't anger anybody.
Yeah. I do think that the people who have not said anything at all, that's the approach. It's like well, if I don't say anything, I'm only like, I'm pissing off people, but I'm not saying the wrong thing. But then if I do say something, I'm risking saying the wrong thing, which is sad.
Yeah, and I think, like, now that because I started this conversation being like, yeah, they better fucking say some shit. But, like, now I'm kind of also thinking about how, Malcolm X said something along the lines of, like, white folks will give you, like, symbolistic victories so they can never give you economic victories. Mm-hmm. And I think the thing that would worry me, I don't know if you guys remember during the whole, like, 2020 uprisings when, like, all the senators, like, kneeled and wore their, like, kente cloths.
Oh my God.
And they're like, it was like meant to seem like some big move. And, like, I don't need that from Beyonce and from Taylor Swift. Like, I don't need them to wear, like, their keffiyehs, but, like, their $3,000 keffiyehs, like, to a, like, fashion show or whatever. Like, because that's a symbolistic win. We want, like, material wins. Mm-hmm. And if they can't give those, like, I think there could be wrong ways to, like, support. I don't need a kente cloth.
Yeah.
When Tim was talking about communities and, like, how we feel safer in our communities to express things like that, and then I do feel like people like Brené Brown, who I think a lot of people consider her like a friend, kind of like a public figure who's a friend or somebody who they can trust.
What's everybody using on Twitter nowadays? What's the word?
What is it? What do they say on Twitter? I'm not on Twitter anymore.
What's the, like, word, the relational stuff
for,
with, like,
for the viewers, X, not formerly known as Twitter.
Sorry. What do they call it? Like, where you feel too included in somebody's, like, celebrity relationship.
Oh, I know what you're talking about. Parasocial relationships.
Yeah, so I think people have a parasocial relationship with Brené Brown.
I learned something today.
That's definitely somebody. Yeah, exactly. It's like kind of like everything that she says, you absorb it and you take it to heart, like as if it's like it's a good friend that's saying something, which is why it was a little bit disheartening when Brené Brown wrote an article about Palestine, and it was very both sidesy. She didn't name what's going on in Palestine as a genocide. She kind of, I mean, she explained towards the end, like, why she came to her opinion, but it was very, I don't know, it was very individualistic, the way that she was looking at everything. And it was, I don't know. I don't know how people who are big fans of Brené Brown, I'm a pretty big fan of Brené Brown, and I was disappointed, but I don't know how most people took it. But she is one of those public figures where you do want, like, people look at her for guidance.
Mm-hmm. Well, what specifically disappointed you about?
I think it's just that the article was very, like, here's what one side says and here's what the other side says. And here's, I don't know, it just kind of, I don't know. It's hard to explain. I read it more recently than I did.
I read it yesterday. I feel like the whole thing was disappointing in the sense that it was very wishy-washy. She wasn't really taking a stand of any sort.
Yeah, she didn't take any
It was
stance.
just, it felt like personally, when I read it, it felt like she was like, I need to say something.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm just going to say the most like neutral thing I could say to try to not piss anyone off, which pissed me off more than if she would have just,
Yeah, because she has all the resources and all the knowledge at her fingertips, and what she cited as why she came to her conclusion was like a women's group or some event that she went to where she heard stories from specific people, and it's like, well, you had more than that to go. You have more than that to go on, and that's why I said it was like a little bit individualistic. It was a little bit, kind of like narrow-minded in a way, her stance on it, because it's like she didn't seek out other voices. She based her opinion on kind of like this group that already has a bias towards her because they were at an event that she also attended.
Yeah, it was just based on her like personal experience, essentially.
Yeah, exactly. Which, she doesn't have intimate personal experience, and that's what she spoke from. Kind of, it was very arm's length as well. Like it was, I don't know. I just wanted something more full throated from her. No matter what she said, just something a little less wishy washy, as you said.
Yeah,
I think that disappointment comes from, if you read her works, you read her or you listen to her speeches, all that kind of stuff, there's a perceived system of like morals from this person.
Absolutely.
Like a system of like, these are your beliefs. Just take all those things that you told us and apply them to this situation. Why are you not doing that? Mm-hmm. And I think that happens for a lot of, especially like these white women who like I mean, I don't really know if Cheryl Strayed has spoken out or what's her name. What's the other white woman podcaster that everybody loves?
I know who you're thinking
I don't even know.
the one who's married to the soccer player.
Yeah, I know. Yeah. I can't think of her name.
It's gonna bother me.
Google it.
I'm gonna Google it.
She has the podcasts that my friends make me listen to.
Everyone has
Doyle.
a podcast.
Glennon
Look at us.
Well, I was gonna say, what we're doing, like Megan Cooper, like call her daddy, or what
Alex Cooper.
Yeah.
Alex Cooper.
So like Glennon Doyle, who they have these like very like based in therapeutic ideas, like these like systems of belief. Here comes Daisy. That feel intuitively. Like if you applied them to this situation, you would come to you would reasonably come to supporting Palestine.
Yeah.
Like, and they're not coming to that.
Yeah.
Even though they like spout off all of these, like they sell books, they sell speeches, they sell all these things, and it's like, it's capitalism. So they're wrapped up in that. And so they have these beliefs that if you just reasonably applied them, there's a very clear outcome, and they don't come to it for some reason.
Yep.
Yeah.
That's very well said.
I also think, myself included, like a lot of people don't know the full history of everything that's happened.
Mm-hmm.
And I think people are just now paying attention and like learning. And I think that is also heavily affecting people's opinions, because I feel like the more I learn and the more I read, the more clear it is to me that I personally am very pro-Palestine.
Mm-hmm.
But I do think that it's not something that we all just know, unfortunately, and it's very sad, but you do have to kind of like do the work in a sense to learn about it, to have a well-informed opinion. And it's sad, but I feel like a lot of people, it's the privilege, like you were saying earlier, like if it's something that is not affecting me directly, like who cares? And I think that's like a stance a lot of people have, whether it's like conscious or not. And then that ladders back to why they don't have a strong opinion on the matters, because they don't have enough information to have a strong opinion on the matter, because they don't care enough to get to that point.
Yeah, but I think it's interesting though. We started the conversation around why don't people speak up more. We have our mascot Daisy coming through.
Taking up the whole frame.
I love you too.
Small horse and or dog.
Adopt,
but-
don't shop.
I love you
But Tim, what you were saying before, how we started this conversation around should people say more? Should people speak out? Do the celebrities owe us their point of view? And we're talking about Brené Brown, and we're saying that her point of view wasn't good enough, or was lacking in certain ways, or maybe it didn't come to the answer that we would have expected. And so that's part of the problem, right? Of like, well, someone did speak out, and now maybe it wasn't on brand for her, or maybe it was generally confused on the topic. And I'll share that I'm confused on the topic because I had the privilege of knowing some folks that were born and raised in Israel, and I remember getting a text from someone that's living in Israel now. I mean, like, we are literally like having to go into like bomb shelters. We're getting the alerts. We're hearing the raids. Like my newborn child is like, we're like is crying. That like those are very real things of like that's happening. And so like I need to hold space for that because that's very real. Like I don't know what it's like living in my home of knowing that your life is at threat from bombs. Now I have other perspectives of where I feel threatened in my day-to-day life, but not from arms, not from going to a music festival and that happening. Like that's not my reality. And then at the same time, okay, well, I also don't know what it's like to, like, my dad's in the hospital. Like I don't know what it's like to all of a sudden be there, and then I don't know how I'm going to get him out if bombs are coming for that hospital, or if like, going to get food that's I don't. So for me, that duality exists in the sense that, well, I don't want my friend to and their child to live like that. That's awful in Israel. But also at the same time, I don't want to see that, a group of people whose only crime was being born a Palestinian to have to live in constant terror either. So I think there's sure there's a better answer, or there's like kind of more black and white things exist. But I think the challenge of this situation specifically is there is a lot of gray. There's a lot of gray, and to be able to hold space for both of those truths, I think it's very different than an all lives matter conversation. It's like those are very, very strong dualities that exist. Of there is challenges. Now, how do you then go forward in respecting the sanctity of both, respecting the value that both people bring as humans? I think that's what's missing. Of like how do we then reach that compromise or reach that opinion together and have those discussions of, well, you have one side that feels like this and one side that feels this way. Where is that common ground? How do you, because that's the only way to find a resolution. Like outside of, okay, if you don't find that common ground, then one side will be existent and one side won't. That's unless you find the common ground. So in order to find the common ground, you have to find the empathy on both sides. And so I went full circle on that conversation, but I think part of that then is, okay, well, if we know that exists, you have to respect and have the empathy on all parties involved. Well, then Daisy's having
She was
fun
whole
back
ass
there.
breathing in my mic. It was amazing.
Please ignore my dog.
What's she doing?
Sorry.
She's scratching her bed before she lays down. Oh,
Aw.
God.
Nice. Well, to have empathy for the two parties specifically that we're talking about, Palestine and Jews, it's being able then to bridge that compromise. You have to be able to seek understanding from both, but then that can't be that can't be downtrodden, or if you bring that opinion to light or you have those conversations, it can't be all of a sudden, well, because you didn't do X, now like you didn't do enough. Like I don't know. We're getting distracted now from
Yeah, she was. She was like slowly doing it. It was so good.
Daisy, I had a point. But
I was like, please don't drink your water.
She was like this.
What's funny is no one can probably really hear it because she's not plugged into a mic.
What I was going to say was, you know what the common ground is? Down with the ruling class.
Yeah, I mean.
Well.
But, okay, so what I wanted to mention about, because you were talking about, like, doing the work, and, like, not to bring it, like, full circle, but I think the reason you started this account in the first place was this idea of doing the work, right? Was this idea of, like, of finding the research, finding the resources, people educating themselves, especially people with privilege. But I think the part of that where I lack confidence and that like is kind of heartbreaking for me is I think back to the uprisings of 2020 where for 2 months, 3 months, people were doing the work. They were buying the books, they were reading the books, they were like saying all the right things, they were going to the protests, like people who would have never, like not just people on the left, not just people who like consider themselves anti-racist, but like even people on the right were like going to the protests because they were like fighting for shit. And we are just 4 years away from that and like literally having Black history books burned, like indigenous history books burned and like or banned or whatever, and like we're going back to like a place where, you know, having education that is like affirming for queer kids is being seen as like grooming. And like that's just 4 years of like where 4 years ago we were like, oh shit, are we gonna make some progress, like, and we have completely gone back and then like even further back, and to the point where I feel like pushing people to interrogate themselves led to a lot of resentment that they then turned around and turned back on the people who are being marginalized, and that makes me worried about how to make real progress if people aren't willing to interrogate their own shit.
Yeah.
And I'll call myself out because I also want to make a clarifying point to that. Like, you know, some people were doing the work, and also in 2020 the benefit of we didn't have a whole lot else to do. But I think the challenge with that, maybe there's always pendulum swings, and like we had Obama, now we had Trump, and then like in everything in between. Like I feel like the poles have become more and more extreme as we in the society that we live in, and people have seemed to navigate to the poles and not be okay with that middle ground. But also, I think, you know, in that some of that fragility and pieces, there are right answers to these questions. Like, Black people have been marginalized in this society. Like, slavery did happen. No one got good trade skills from slavery. Like, no, absolutely not. Like, now, do I blame like the white person I met this morning? Like, no, they didn't own slaves, but like as a marginalized group, like that did happen. There is oppression. Racism does exist in our country. Like what's happening in Palestine, that is genocide. Like there are right answers to this. There's gray answers. There's gray area in the nuances that surround it, but there are right answers to this, and I don't want to shy away from that in my kind of commentary. I want to make sure it's very clear. Like there are some undeniable truths that exist, and you can't fall in love with the gray areas. And I'm calling that's not in response to what you said, in response to what I offered earlier. You have to still make sure that the truths are solid and that is recognized. Now, how you get there and the environment around that, sure, we can talk about the nuances and how do you go forward, and, you know, perspectives from all sides, but to deny the wrongs, the rights, and everything in between that's happening in those moments and whatever the situation is, you still have to get there. That's a non-negotiable. And maybe what's missing is like some of those hard truths people don't want to sit with and people want to dance around, but you have to at least acknowledge the hard truths.